Ever think about like how one decision, one seemingly small choice can like set off this huge chain reaction?
Yeah.
And I mean, we see it every day in our own lives, right?
Yeah.
But today we're looking at a real life example, this tragic story out of South Carolina, where a drunk driving incident on a wedding night had this like ripple effect that reached, I mean, so far beyond just those immediately involved.
It's interesting you say that because what's really striking about this case is how much it reveals how interconnected all of our lives actually are. We
Yeah.
often just see the statistics about drunk driving, but this deep dive lets us look at the human cost, the way one person's choice impacted so many others.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to do today, really focusing on the people, the normal people, whose lives were like forever changed because of this one event. So
Mhm.
we're going to unpack this whole story of Samantha Miller. She was a bride who was tragically killed.
Right.
And then we'll talk about, kind of the ripple effect, the aftermath that continues to affect her husband, her family, even the wider community. And, I think as we go through this, it's interesting to just like think about the choices we make each day
Yeah.
and how they might, create ripples, both
Yeah.
big and small, in the lives of, well, everybody around us, right?
Absolutely. It's a powerful exercise in recognizing the interconnectedness and it makes you think about the responsibility we all carry.
Yeah, for sure. So let's take it back to April 28th, 2023, on Folly Beach, South Carolina. Picture a picture-perfect wedding celebration. Samantha Miller and Aric Hutchinson surrounded by, all their family and friends. They just said, I do.
Right.
And full of joy, they leave the reception in this golf cart ready to start their new life together.
Yeah.
But that happipiness is just shattered when their golf cart is hit by another vehicle driven by 25-year-old Jamie Komoroski.
Right.
And the impact was, I mean, just horrific.
Yeah. Komoroski was going 65 miles per hour in a 25-mile-per-hour zone, and her blood alcohol content was 3 times the legal limit.
Wow. I mean, it's hard to even comprehend the force of that collision, right? Like
Right.
the golf cart was thrown,
Yeah.
over 100 yards?
Yeah.
And sadly, Samantha, I mean, still in her wedding dress, didn't survive.
Yeah.
And Aric, her husband, he was left with a traumatic brain injury and multiple broken bones and, facing this grueling, I mean, both physical and emotional recovery.
Yeah, these details, they really bring the concept of recklessness into focus. It's not just a mistake, it was a blatant disregard for the safety of everyone else on the road. And her, impaired judgment, coupled with excessive speed, it just turned a joyous occasion into this absolute nightmare.
It's just heartbreaking. And, later Aric, he actually shared that the last thing that he remembers Samantha saying was that she wanted the night to never end.
Oh.
And then he woke up in a hospital bed, right? His world was just totally shattered.
It's such a stark contrast that highlights the suddenness of loss and the way life can change in just a split second.
It's true, yeah. A jarring reminder for all of us, right?
Yes.
We often hear about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but what does that actually mean for someone like Aric, someone who's gone through something like this?
Well, you can almost think of it as your brain being stuck on replay, right?
Wow.
Constantly reliving that traumatic event. And, on top of that, Eric's brain injury adds another layer of complexity, right? He's not only dealing with emotional trauma, but also the physical challenges of relearning basic functions, coping with constant pain, and navigating a world that now just feels completely different.
All of that while grieving the loss of his wife. I mean, it's really hard to fathom the weight of that.
It is. It is. And we also have to remember that, this trauma doesn't just impact Aric, but it also impacts his family and his friends. They're all now facing their own grief and their own anxieties. And they also have the immense responsibility of caring for somebody who's been, so deeply affected by this.
Yeah. It's a really stark illustration of how trauma can spread through this network of relationships and create this ripple effect of pain and just complete disruption.
Exactly. And that's where we really see, the true depth of this tragedy. It's not just a single event. It's this ongoing wave of consequences that continue to touch the lives of so many people. We also can't forget about, Samantha's parents, Brad and Lisa Miller.
Right.
They've been really open about their grief and the anger they feel toward the driver who took their daughter's life. Try to imagine losing a child.
I know.
Especially in such a senseless, sudden way. It's a pain no parent should ever have to experience.
Yeah. Lisa Miller, she actually gave this really powerful interview where she said it wasn't an accident. This person chose to drink, get behind the wheel, and just plow down my daughter. And I think that statement just really hits the nail on the head. It really captures the feeling of injustice that
Yes.
so many families of, drunk driving victims experience, right? It wasn't some act of fate. It was a choice, somebody's choice. And that makes it, I think, all the more difficult to process.
Absolutely. And it also raises the complex question of forgiveness.
Right.
Can you ever really forgive someone who has caused you this kind of pain? I mean, immeasurable pain. There's no easy answer to that question. It's a personal struggle. But we also have to think about the fact that, this tragedy, it went way beyond the immediate family. I mean, it really sent shockwaves through that whole Folly Beach community.
Yeah, think about it. Folly Beach, it's known for its beautiful beaches, laid-back atmosphere. It's like a vacation spot.
Hmm.
And then suddenly, this carefree environment is just shattered by this stark reminder of how fragile life really is.
Exactly. These kinds of events, they don't just impact those who are directly involved. They ripple outward and they end up affecting friends, neighbors, even just complete strangers who are just touched by the story. It forces a whole community to confront, some very difficult questions
Right.
about, responsibility, accountability, the consequences of choices, all of that.
Yeah. And now let's shift our focus a little bit to Jamie Komoroski. She's the driver who was responsible for this tragedy. She ultimately pleaded guilty to a whole range of charges, including reckless homicide and felony DUI causing
Yeah,
death.
yeah.
Right? And she received a 25-year prison sentence.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that this wasn't just some momentary lapse of judgment. Komoroski actually admitted to struggling with alcohol addiction. So this adds, a whole nother layer to this case. And she said during her courtroom apology, "I realize now that I was addicted to alcohol and did not care how my actions affected others." Wow.
And she also, expressed a lot of remorse, saying, "I am devastated, deeply ashamed, and sorry for what I did. I wish I could go back and undo this terrible tragedy, but I cannot."
It's tough to process, right?
Yeah.
It's like, on the one hand, she's accepting accountability, taking responsibility.
Right.
But on the other hand, nothing can bring Samantha back.
Yeah. It's the heartbreaking reality of this whole situation, right?
Hmm.
Komoroski's apology, it might offer some solace to, those who were affected, but it can't erase the pain or undo the damage that was done. But it does, I think, point to the importance of addressing addiction,
Yes.
really treating it as a public health issue, because it's a disease that can have such devastating consequences, not just for the person with the addiction, but for everyone around them.
Absolutely.
And this case also, I think, shines a light on bars and restaurants and their role in all of this, like preventing drunk driving.
Yeah.
Because reports show that Komoroski, she was drinking at several different places before the crash happened.
Yeah.
So it really makes you think about the whole concept of responsible alcohol service,
Right. I mean, bartenders, servers, they have this legal and moral obligation to make sure that they are not, over-serving their patrons. And there are actually lawsuits that are pending against some of the bars that served Komoroski.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that allege, that they contributed to this tragedy by not cutting her off.
It's such a complex issue, right? It's got all these legal and ethical dimensions. So on the one hand, you have businesses, and they have this responsibility to their customers and to the community, right? To prevent harm.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, individuals are ultimately, responsible for their own choices. So it's like, where do you draw the line?
Right.
But regardless of where you stand on all of that, on the debate, the outcome, the result is still the same. A young life was cut short. Families were just devastated, and an entire community was changed because of one person's decision to drink and drive.
Yeah. It's just a really sobering reminder to all of us that our choices, particularly when it comes to alcohol, can have such far-reaching consequences.
That's true. And, it's so easy when we hear about these kinds of cases to just get caught up in the legalities, and all of the drama that unfolds in the courtroom. But we have to remember, at the end of the day, this is about real people, normal people whose lives were just irrevocably changed by one terrible decision.
Absolutely. It's so important to remember that human element to this story. Samantha Miller was more than just a statistic. A name and a headline.
Right.
She was a daughter, a wife, a friend. She was a person with hopes and dreams, an entire future ahead of her, and it was tragically cut short.
Yeah. And Samantha's family actually received a $1.3 million partial settlement as part of a wrongful death lawsuit. But, no amount of money can really compensate for their loss. And I think for those who maybe aren't familiar with that term, a wrongful death claim, essentially it's designed to, hold the responsible party accountable for their negligence, right? Their negligence that led to the death. So it's a way for families to seek some measure of justice, some kind of compensation for their, I mean, just truly immense loss.
Yeah. And even that financial compensation, while it's significant, it's still, I mean, it's just a drop in the bucket compared to the emotional toll, the emptiness that they're now always going to carry with them. And it's just a stark reminder that drunk driving, it's not just a crime, it's this public health crisis that affects everyone, not just those who are, directly involved in these accidents.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And I think about even, think about the first responders,
Yeah.
people who arrived at that scene, right? That horrific scene. And then the medical professionals who treated the victims and, the legal teams who worked on this case, even the jurors, the people who had to sit through the trial and just hear all these agonizing details, they're all carrying a piece of this burden with them, Yeah. Yeah. It's just like those ripples that we were talking about before, right?
Yeah.
They spread outward and they end up impacting the community, the state, the entire nation. And it just underscores this urgent need, right? For education, for awareness campaigns, for stricter laws, and just overall more robust support systems for people who are dealing with addiction.
Yeah, for sure. And if we zoom out even further, we see this pattern of preventable tragedies, this cycle that seems to repeat itself again and again. It just makes you wonder, what can we do as individuals and as a society to break this cycle? What can we do to prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening in the future? It's a tough question, right? It's the million-dollar question. I mean, maybe it starts with each of us just taking a look in the mirror.
Yeah.
Examining our own choices, being mindful of those potential consequences, not just for ourselves, but, for all those around us.
Yeah, it is a tough question, but it's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by all of this,
Yeah.
right? By the scale of the problem.
Mm.
But I think it's important to remember that even these small actions, they can make a difference.
For sure.
What if we all just, committed to being a little more mindful,
Yeah.
more responsible when it comes to, alcohol?
I think that's a great place to start. Maybe it's just speaking up. When we see someone who's had too much to drink and they're about to get behind the wheel, or maybe it's offering to be the designated driver, or even just supporting our friends and family who are dealing with addiction, struggling with addiction.
Yeah, totally. It's really about recognizing that
Yeah.
we're all, we're not just individuals making these isolated choices.
Right.
We're part of this larger community.
Yeah.
And our actions, like we said, they have this ripple effect.
For sure.
And sometimes, one single decision can be the difference between life and death, between, joy and just this unimaginable heartbreak.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, we should also remember that there are a lot of resources available for those who need help. So, if you are struggling with addiction or somebody who is, please don't hesitate to reach out. I mean, there are so many organizations and professionals who are really dedicated to providing support and guidance on that path to recovery.
Absolutely. Well, this deep dive into the tragic case of Samantha Miller has been, a difficult one, but it's a necessary conversation to have.
Yeah.
And it's a story that really reminds us all of the human cost of drunk driving.
Oh.
The consequences, they reach so far, far beyond just those immediate victims. And so as we wrap up, I kind of want to leave you with this thought. What choices will you make today? What kind of ripple effects will they create? Will you be a force for positive change? For responsibility and compassion. I mean, the choice, it really is yours.
And, let's also remember Samantha Miller, not just as a victim, but, as a young woman whose life was full of so much promise, a reminder that we each have that power to make choices that protect and uplift others.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's a conversation we need to keep having, and hopefully together, we can create a future where tragedies like this become just a distant memory